I think I may have stumbled upon a brand new freeze-dried product that you should try in your freeze-drying business, and that is to take your famous guacamole recipe and convert it into a freeze-dried cube that then you can reconstitute later using water and make it just as fresh and tasting good as before. If you want to see how this is done and how you can make your own recipe using a freeze dryer, check out this video. Let's get started. Now, when you're thinking about using your freeze dryer to start a business and make some money, you got to think about a couple different things. Number one is, how is the consumer going to utilize a freeze-dried product? You could sell a freeze-dried strawberry, people could snack on it, and that's fine. But what other applications could they use for those freeze-dried strawberries? Because usually when you're baking with strawberries, you're gonna use it as a puree. But with freeze drying, removing the water from a strawberry, you now have a moisture-free natural ingredient that someone can crush up into a powder and then naturally flavor it for whatever they're gonna use it for. So applications within the freeze drying process has a lot of different varieties, and that's why starting a freeze drying business doesn't have to be a huge obstacle for you if you think outside the box, outside of candy and things that you're seeing a lot of on social media and different people doing. So that's the actual product side. Think about what the application would be for something that you're gonna freeze dry. And the second part of all this is testing things out. You gotta experiment with what the freeze-dried process could produce for you. And that's why having a home freeze dryer to start out with, to experiment with different recipes, you can really hone in how you want to actually present that end product to the consumer. Do you actually want it to be some type of snack that's freeze-dried as is, or do you want it to be something where they reconstitute it, where, let's say for fresh guacamole, someone is on the go, they're backpacking, camping, they're traveling in the air, and they can't actually store fresh guacamole. No need to bring a knife or things like that you need to cut all these different ingredients up. You can just add water and then have fresh, natural, organic type of guacamole on the go. So as you can see, there's opportunities with creating a different recipe that is freeze-dried. You just need to figure out what avenue to go. Let's make some fresh guacamole. Now, the recipe that I'm gonna use is my mom's recipe, which includes cilantro, tomato, avocados, red onion, lime juice, and the ranch seasoning that you can buy at the store. We're gonna use a mortar and pestle today because I make a lot of guacamole for different family meals, and so I bought this and it was a worthwhile investment because it crushes everything up. You can use whatever you want. You can use a bowl, fork, whatever you use to make sure all the ingredients are put together. And after we make the fresh guacamole, I'm gonna share with you how I'm gonna arrange it on my freeze dryer trays to make them perfect serving size once they get freeze dried. Now, I don't have an exact measurement of all the different ingredients, so you're not gonna really see, 1 teaspoon of this. I usually do guacamole to taste. If you're really wanting to fine tune your recipe, obviously you can do the measurements yourself, and that way when you're gonna do a business out of it, you know exactly what can be consistently freeze dried for that same taste. What my mom told me, I'm no fancy cook, but what she told me, if you can see right here, is to kind of bunch up your cilantro, and that way when you do cut it, it cuts all the leaves and the little stems perfectly, and you don't actually have to cut up each individual leaf too much. Now what we're gonna do some of the onion. With red onion, now with it being fresh, it provides a little bit more of that crunch, and it also adds just a little bit more of kind of a kick to it, and adds a little bit more flavor. So that's why we're gonna do red onions. Now, what I usually do with my guacamole kind of cadence is I don't ever put like the actual tomato in here yet, because I want to make it and grind it up with some of the harder ingredients, and then I'll put the tomato in the last, just because that way it's not completely smashed into the recipe. I like cutting up these avocados into little squares even within the skin. You don't have to do that. You could just put the whole avocado in there, obviously scooping it out from the skin. Call me OCD. This is what I've always done, and it takes a little bit longer, but it just makes it smaller pieces. We're gonna see for the first time. I've never done freeze-dried guacamole, but we're gonna do that today, and we're gonna see how we can kind of reconstitute it so that it tastes the same. I'm sure it's gonna taste the same because, all the flavor is still in here, and the great thing about freeze-drying is that it keeps the highest level of nutritional value in whatever you're freeze drying, upwards of 90% typically. And the seasoning that I use for guacamole is this ranch seasoning. You can use, natural things like salts and things like that, but I use the ranch seasoning just because, I don't know, there's something different about how it tastes. All right, there's all the tomatoes. putting that in there. I usually do 1 Roma tomato per 3 avocados. I don't do any more than that just because unless people really love a ton of tomatoes, I don't do that. So we'll just use a spoon to mix it all up. Look how awesome that is. Now with the lime juice, I just kind of do a couple squirts. I don't do too much. That's probably more of like a half a teaspoon or so. After I get done with that, I'll just put a little bit more ranch seasoning in. That should be all the ingredients. So let's give it a good taste. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, so how are we gonna freeze dry this? Well, for one, what you see in front of me, this is one of the silicone molds that Harvest Right has, and you can buy off their site on harvestright.com. Now, I've got a couple of these that they sent me when I bought one of my freeze dryers several years ago, so you can buy them on their website. And what I like about these different molds is that it puts it in these little bite-sized cubes here. And think about it in the business side of things. So if you just need somebody for backpacking and they just want a couple of cubes just to get a couple of good savoriness to whatever they're cooking on their camping trip, they don't need huge blocks of Mylar bags of guacamole, right? They just need a couple cubes. So it gives you an opportunity to look at small serving sizes, but also look at the way you're gonna present the guacamole cubes as well, because you want it to be presentable when someone actually opens up the bag or uses it. And I kind of think of it being similar to a cube of chicken bouillon, you know, where you drop that little cube in and it dissolves in the hot water in the microwave or in boiling water. That's kind of what I'm envisioning these little cubes of guacamole to be that are freeze dried, is something that's very manageable to put in a packet and then reconstitute. So in order to kind of get those serving sizes, I'm gonna add all this guacamole to this bowl and then we'll weigh it. That way we know how much guacamole we're gonna put into this tray. All right, now we've got all the guacamole in there. Let's put it back onto the scale, and 470 grams. I'm writing that on a piece of paper just so we know for reference. And then once we freeze dry this, we'll know what type of moisture was removed from it, because I'm assuming it's gonna lose the weight of that lime juice and the avocado juice and tomato juice, things like that. All right, so to make things easy, I'm just gonna put all this guacamole on the cubes. I don't really care where it's going, like in the middle or whatever, because the freeze dryers of today's world, like they're smart enough to where they just sense all the moisture that's in whatever you're putting in there. So it doesn't really matter whether it's on the edges or whatever, but we're obviously gonna wanna check for dryness once we get done. But this is kind of just what I'm doing. I've actually done, for my freeze drying business, I've done some testing for different people where I just say, hey, send me your yogurt recipe, or as people talk to me about different things that they want to test. And that's part of having a freeze dryer and having a freeze drying business. There's a lot of ways for you to grow a business and make money. I am kind of pressing firmly on these cubes because I want to make sure that there's not like air in the middle. I want it firmly pressed because I really want to try to get a firm cube out of each individual square. Looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 6. So we've got 30 different cubes. Perfect. Well, there you have it. Fresh guacamole made with fresh ingredients. Now it's time to freeze dry it. So the freeze dryer process actually can pre-freeze your food and then freeze dry it, taking out all the moisture, going through that process of sublimation. But what you can do is speed up the whole freeze drying cycle time by pre-freezing your food. So if you're new to freeze drying, you can do that. Just find a stand-up freezer or put it in your home freezer, and you can kind of save 5 to 6 hours of what the freeze dryer would freeze it for, and that way you're just going straight to the freeze drying cycle process. I'm gonna put these tray lids for my Harvest Right on here. This is made by freeze-drying-supplies.com. And what I love about these tray lids is they've got these raised edges, as you can see right here. These allow you to stack more and more trays on top of here, even with the tray lids. And that's kind of different than having the actual tray stackers on the edges. This prevents a little bit more of that susceptibility to freezer burn, other types of things maybe getting exposed to your fresh product here. So if you want to buy these, you can go to the video description and go to freeze-drying-supplies.com. I've got a link below in the video description. You can use my affiliate link. Once this is pre-frozen for 5 to 6 hours, I'm going to then activate my freeze dryer settings. And what we're going to try to do that at for testing purposes is we're going to do it at the factory temp of 125 degrees. I'm going to set the pre-freeze temp at -15, initial freeze down to just maybe 2 or 3 hours. That's just because I've already pre-frozen it, but that just adds a little bit more of a safeguard to it. All right, don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're gonna see what fresh guacamole looks like freeze-dried. We're gonna do some taste testing, as well as see what it looks like texture-wise, and also gonna do some reconstitution with some water to see if we can get it back to this original state with the same great taste that we have today. While we wait for the freeze dryer to do its thing, you can support this channel and my efforts with the freeze drying industry in 2 ways. Number one is like or subscribe to this channel. That'll really help more and more of my videos get to more people to help them in their freeze drying journey. And number two is you can do something completely free, which is join my email list of freeze drying entrepreneurs and people interested in the freeze drying space. And you can be really connected with what's happening in the freeze drying industry. So if you want to be more connected to this channel, go to the video description down below and click on freezedriedbusiness.com. You'll see a pop-up that pops up to enter your email, and then I'll send you a welcome email with also my ROI spreadsheet to calculate what type of ROI and profit you can generate from a freeze drying business. So thanks a lot. Let's get back to see what the freeze dryer did to the guacamole. All right, the freeze dried cycle is done. I'm really excited to show you what the finished freeze dried guacamole cube looks like. So let's take a look at the finished product here. All right, take a look at this. So as I get the molds out and pop out these different cubes, this is a Harvest Right logo because that's what they have the molds for, but as you can see, it stayed pretty intact. Now let's put this on the counter and just give you some perspective. Take a look at that. You can see the cilantro that I put in there. You can even see some of the tomato that I put in there. It all freeze dried together, and it's actually very light. I don't want to crush this because we're going to use it for simple purposes, but it's really not that heavy. Look at that. Even the red onion is in there. Okay, so let's take all of this out of the tray and let's weigh it total, because I've actually got my nifty little piece of paper that we did initially, and it was 470 grams of gross product, the gross guacamole weight. So let's go ahead and weigh all the freeze-dried cubes and then see how it comes out and how much water it lost. Okay, now here's the fun part about freeze-drying. And if you're wanting to start a freeze-drying business, this is kind of the fun experimentation and the research side of testing out different products. What we're testing out is, can we freeze-dry guacamole, fresh guacamole that we mix up with the different ingredients? I would say that yes, check. We have made freeze-dried guacamole. Second part of that is we want to see how much weight it lost, because we want to see, one, how can we package it up to give a certain amount of serving size. We also want to be able to calculate how much actual gross product do we need to make if we were going to make this at scale, because if we're running a business or we're trying to see if we can market this better, then we would actually want to see how much product we can produce in one batch of guacamole. Third part is going to be, what can we do with reconstitution for our freeze-dried guacamole, because we took the water out through the freeze dryer process. So if I put a cube into this bowl and then I put maybe a teaspoon of water, is that how much water it lost in here, or do we need to put a little bit more water in there? So let's first actually weigh the bowl, and that way we can tear it off. And we're doing this in grams like we did initially, and start loading them into the bowl. I've already put 6 in here and it's only reached 18 grams. So a lot of weight has been removed through the freeze drying process for all of these guacamole cubes. And you see how, you know, there's a little bit of shavings that is over the top because the cube went in here. If you were gonna sell this, what I would do is, obviously I don't want that overhanging look and feel. So I would kind of clean this up and make sure the cubes look very presentable. If you watched a lot of my videos, I'm kind of a perfectionist in this way, in that like I just really look at how the product looks versus immediately just like, hey, did it work, and put it in the package. So I want it to be high quality, both on looks and taste. 90 grams total. So 470 grams is what we started with. And then now we reduce that all the way down to 90 grams. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna focus on the reconstitution part. I don't actually do a whole lot of reconstitution, so we're gonna kind of experiment in just my own way, but you can obviously go through a lot more in-depth research on figuring out exactly how much water weight you lost in the product, and then figuring out backwards math, how much you should put back into a given product. So what I'm gonna do is, I know we had 470 grams of guacamole before we freeze dried it. And after that, we just weighed it, and now we have 90 grams net, which means that we lost 380 grams of water weight from the guacamole. So in my nifty little phone here, I put 380 grams into an ounce conversion, and it came out with that it's 13.4 ounces. All right, now I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm gonna ask Siri how many tablespoons are in 1 ounce, because now we can actually do the calculation of seeing how much the conversion is of tablespoons to ounces. So let's ask her. How many tablespoons is in 1 ounce?
The answer is 2 tablespoons.
Okay, if you didn't hear that, she said 2 tablespoons. So we have 10 cubes, and we did 30 cubes total. So we can make basically an ounce worth of guacamole reconstituted. And so now we're gonna put 2 tablespoons of water into this bowl. And this should be the amount that we remove. And all we're gonna do now with the cubes now is we're just gonna kind of mix this up. It's getting a lot more into more of kind of that chunkiness here. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm gonna go 1 more tablespoon. So 3 tablespoons to 1 ounce. And yeah, this is looking good. This actually looks just like what we originally had with our guacamole. Okay, shame on me for not having actual tortilla chips, but I've got some Ruffles in my pantry, and I'm gonna test this out and see what this reconstituted guacamole tastes like. Wow, I'm not lying. That tasted just like our fresh guacamole. I'm not doing that just for this video. Like, this is just delicious. Let me give you an idea of what I just tasted. Texture was the same as the fresh guacamole. Tasted creamy. There wasn't any kind of chunkiness to it. I can taste the red onion. I can taste the avocados great. I have a little bit more of that saltiness that's in there. That's what I tasted as well. The only thing that it was different was, there wasn't a ton of crunch from the fresh red onion, which is okay. This tasted awesome. All right, we're done with the taste test and everything. I don't know about you, but I really was thrilled with the way this all turned out. So let's talk about the business end of freeze drying guacamole. So number one is, I think in default, having this product freeze dried as is and having it as a snack, like a freeze dried strawberry or freeze dried ice cream scoop, that's not gonna be the selling point. I would go with the reconstitution idea. And just like with any business, once you have a product, you need to figure out who your target audience is and what type of marketing language and words you can actually use to tell people why they would want to have a freeze-dried guacamole cube and reconstitute it versus having fresh. And again, if you want to start a freeze-drying business, this is the next phase of this industry. A lot of people freeze-dry candy. A lot of people are kind of used to having and seeing freeze-dried Skittles, freeze-dried everything, right? So now we have to raise it to the next level. Freeze-drying is not a fad. Freeze-drying is not going away. But what is going to go away is the newness of a product. Once everyone's experienced having a freeze-dried Skittle, it's not as new anymore. And so now you have to kind of change things up. So how can you make a freeze-dried product and market it as something that you can call it your own? So speaking to the person who is looking at the freeze-drying industry space and seeing a lot of different chatter online about this market being very saturated, you're only hearing that from people who have basically kind of had a great success with the newness of freeze-dried candy, and really they just went in there with no idea really what their business is about. This is really going to define you. This type of recipe and research and experimentation with freeze-drying processes is really going to take you to another level and really going to probably give you a lot more confidence going into this so that you know what you're kind of going to be doing with the freeze dryer. And if you want to learn more about freeze drying and how to prepare different things for your freeze drying business, check out the next couple videos. I'll see you there.